All right, welcome to Ohio Investors Facebook group page. As promised, we're going to talk today about tenant estoppel certificates. So make sure we take that banner down, Isaiah. All right, so what we're talking about today is estoppel agreements, and a lot of people don't even know what those are. So when, as realtors, we're writing contracts on properties that may already have tenants in them, may have some agreements and things worked out between those tenants. They may have deposits, they may have a number of things, and the new owner's just a little bit leery and doesn't know how to ask for that information through the contracts. What are some ways that you guys have approached that in the past when you didn't use an estoppel agreement?
I've had the title company wanted that information, or the bank. I forget which one it was.
Title company asked for
Yeah.
some of the information, not all of it, but they asked for some of it
Okay.
because they have to prorate rents when they're doing the close.
All right. So when you're dealing with an estoppel agreement, what you're looking for is just a list of information that you're not necessarily sure you want to trust the new or the previous owner with. You want to go directly to the tenants if at all possible. So what I've done in the past without using an estoppel agreement, in the comment section, I'll put things like we want a rent roll, we want proof of deposits, we want more information in regards to the tenants, the current leases, all kinds of information that as a new owner you'd want to know about. You'd want to be able to look at, look through, and treat that actually as part of your negotiation. Because if you've got a tenant in there that hasn't paid for 3 or 4 months, you know immediately you're going to be dealing with an eviction or something like that. So it's important that you're able to ask these questions and get the information that you need versus just throwing an offer out there, agreeing on a price, doing some inspections, and moving on down the road. There's a little bit more detail here that we have to go into, and the estoppel agreement allows us to do that. So, Frank, why don't you go ahead and just pull up the estoppel agreement and pull up a blank one, and let's kind of walk through it.
Can you guys see that okay?
I see me real well.
Let's make that our main screen, Isaiah. Put the estoppel agreement in the main screen. There we go.
There we go.
Why don't you get rid of the pictures of us for now so we can kind of look at this? There we go. Okay.
Scroll down a little bit just so we can see the top of the document.
Right there.
Okay,
right.
There you go. You go ahead and walk us through it, Frank.
And speaking, this is not a bad idea when we're listing a property to gather this information, but we're going to get you're going to do one for each tenant there. So if this is a 4-unit, we're going to have 4 estoppel agreements. Tenant's address and unit number. Do they have a written lease for the apartment? If not, do they have a verbal lease agreement? Okay, simple enough. When did your lease begin date and when does your lease end date? Very important when you're buying a property. You want to know when those dates are ending. Are you currently on a month-to-month lease? Please list legal names of all people living in your property. How many people their lease may say they're allowed to have 2 people in the property and they've got 4, 5, 6. There are some cities now like Brunswick that is requesting this from anybody that's non-owner. How much is your monthly rent? When is your rent due? Have you paid a security deposit? If so, how much did you pay for the deposit? All right. So we want to know what they have on file. Did you pay last month's rent? Or did you pay for the last month's rent when you moved in? Because some landlords will go first and last month's rent plus security deposit.
Yeah, I actually had one that closed maybe 3 or 4 months ago where we had written the contract, we got all the way to the end, and we're dealing with the title company, and the landlord said, even though I collected a deposit, I allowed that tenant to use that deposit to pay rent 2 months ago. So now that deposit doesn't exist. What do you do in that situation?
Well, we're going to see here. We're going to see here how that's handled.
Exactly.
And that's part of this estoppel. Because right now, what you see is you have the tenant filling this out. All right. When was the last time you paid rent? For what month? How much did you pay then? what utilities do you pay for, if any? So what are they responsible for as the tenant? Did you pay any other deposits or prepayments when you moved in? If so, how much and what for? A lot of times for an animal, things along those lines. Oh, here, I guess that's covered in the next line. Do you have pets? If so, if yes, how many and what breeds? Again, your lease may signify that you're allowed to have one dog and you're paying $50 a month extra, or you're putting a deposit of $250 down for that dog, and now we find out they have 3.
And what breeds are so important because, I mean, from an insurance standpoint, a lot of insurance companies don't allow certain breeds, in their policies. So, you find out that there's not sure exactly what breed it is that's going to be not included, but let's say a Doberman Pinscher. I'm not picking on Doberman Pinschers or anything, but let's say that's one that an insurance company excludes. Well, if you see that pop up, you may want to check with your insurance company because you're buying that property as an investor to make sure that that breed is allowed to live in that property.
Okay, let's go back to this. Do you have any other written or verbal agreements with the landlord? For instance, I mow the lawn and he takes $50 off my rent every month. Are there any problems related to the tenancy or any repairs needed for your unit? I just went to list one, which is managed by a property manager, and the clients thought everything was working fine in there. According to the tenants, everything's not working fine in there. In fact, it's something that we asked the property manager to take care of last summer. So find this stuff out now. Now, what you see here, and this is kind of important, is at the bottom you have the tenant signing that saying, okay, above is true and correct to the best of my knowledge, and they're signing it. Below that, you're having the owner or the property manager reviewing it and saying, yeah, we agree with that, or we don't agree with it, and making changes. And then, of course, we got to go back and have everything initial. So that's why this is such a strong agreement, both for us when we're presenting offers. It's also strong when we're listing properties, either way.
Absolutely. I mean, because when you look at this, let's face the reality. The information we're pulling off of a listing, whether it be a listing through the MLS or something that somebody posted on social media, it's only as good as the person that's inputting the information. So they may say that the appliances transfer with the contract, but ultimately, when you do this estoppel agreement, if the tenants are saying they own those appliances, that's going to impact how we're going to negotiate on this property. It's going to impact the entire deal. So pets, all these other little questions. And what I'd like to put out there is if there's additional information that any of our investors online ask for in their own estoppel agreements. This is one we got provided to us by a real estate attorney and we've used in the past, but it doesn't mean that there isn't additional information that we may even want to add to this estoppel agreement.
And speaking of that, you just mentioned what appliances are the landlord.
It said that in there.
Oh, it did say that. Did I miss that? Okay.
It did have that on there. So ultimately, using these estoppel agreements, it's going to throw up a red flag way further in the process than at closing. On that deposit issue that I had 3 or 4 months ago. If an estoppel agreement had been used, it would have become a red flag because the landlord's got to send it to the tenant, and when it comes back to the landlord to send over to the buying agent, they're going to review it. They're not just going to send it to you blindly. And if they see what they told you versus what's on that agreement doesn't match, they're going to work through correcting it or negotiate, out a deal based on the mismatched information. So that could come down to utilities. A lot of times, the listing will say, oh, they pay for electricity and they don't pay for gas. Well, then you get down to it and you're further into the process and you realize the landlord has to pay for gas because this is one of those systems that has a boiler. Well, a boiler system heats the whole house. So obviously the gas is paid for by the landlord. In those situations, we can get to the questions we haven't asked way sooner and prevent a deal from falling apart or renegotiate a deal so that it comes together better.
Yeah, the fewer surprises, the better.
Right.
Absolutely. Time kills deals, and the further down the path you get and the more money you spend on inspections and appraisals and things like that, now all of a sudden you're like, man, I already put $2,000-3,000 into this property. I'm not so much worried about that stove. But let's face it, a stove is going to cost you a few $100s that you don't want to spend, and it affects your bottom line. So why not know that information up front so that you can work through it, negotiate it, or whatever you need to do to just have a more clean, solid deal down the road. So moving forward, I intend to use the Estoppel agreement on a lot more of my deals because before I'm just writing in a couple lines, but I wasn't gathering enough of this information. And to be honest, some sellers may not want to do this, but it's going to push some information back to them to make them accountable to the new buyer.
I have a
Now,
question, guys,
go
real
ahead.
quick. Sorry, Teach. Who's getting this filled out?
I'm putting it into Dotloop when I send over the contract as a blank document to the listing agent to have them either send directly to the tenants or give to the current landlord to have them send to the tenants and get it filled out.
I wasn't sure how you would handle that with the tenants, because I know that the sellers probably don't want you to have any direct contact with the tenants.
Right. Yeah, it has to go through that listing agent. But even if you're buying a wholesale deal, this is not a bad idea to ask, because let's face it, there's some gray areas in some of these deals that if you don't ask the questions, you're not going to find out until it's too late, or you've spent money on trying to get that deal through transaction. What I mean by that is the inspection or the appraisals or just your time. Time is money.
Right. And don't forget, if you're going to use this, put it as an addendum to the contract.
Absolutely.
So that it's part of that contract that you sent over. Just like the Ohio property disclosure. So.
That was going to be my question: is you would send this with once you have an accepted offer and you send a contract?
I would send it with the offer.
With the offer, okay.
Yeah, and give them a deadline. I want this within 72 hours or something like that. It's part of the contract. It's part of the deal that they need to hold up on their end. And if you got good tenants that they like their landlord, they're going to have no problem filling this out in a timely manner and getting it back to us.
Ideally, we'd want this filled out subject to an accepted offer. So if we're but you're not going to get that very often. Let's just face it.
Right.
You're not going to get it. So maybe when we put it in the offer.
Well, when you say we're not going to get that often, explain. Just because we're out live, or investors are watching, why wouldn't you get that often?
You usually don't have that much control before you have an accepted offer on a property. They just don't have, you don't have that much juice in the game that they're not going to go and do that. There's other offers coming in. They're going to talk to other people. This is a lot of legwork for somebody. If you're going to put it in your contract, put it subject to receiving this, like Blaze said, 72 hours or whatever that time frame is, and subject to time to review it. Because there could be stuff on here you say, hell, I ain't buying that property. We've got tenants that haven't paid in 4 months are stuck in there. We don't know, there's no security deposits, or whatever the situation is. You may say, hey, hold on, I'm not buying this, or I'll only buy it if I could do a walkthrough after you've evicted the tenants.
Yeah, good point. I mean, the fact that they may refuse to fill out an estoppel agreement all in itself can be a big red flag. If you're a landlord that doesn't intend to get new tenants and you want to work with the ones that you have in there because it's less work and it's easier to do, you want to make sure those are good tenants and your agreement with them is what you've been promised. And this estoppel agreement fills in some of that gray area. You're never going to fill in all of it. I mean, let's face it, there's always going to be some gray area to every contract, but this sure does fill in quite a bit of it and makes me feel a whole lot better about it.
It wouldn't be bad to have at the bottom of this, after the owner or manager signs it, accepted by, and have the client's name, our client.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's not a bad idea at all.
Another thing it does is it puts the tenants kind of on notice that something's happening.
Right.
Because a lot of times the sellers don't even tell the tenants what's going on.
Right. Yeah. How important is that? I mean, so once the deal is accepted and it's on paper, really there should be some communication there so that it's not a surprise come closing to the tenants and to the new owner. You know, sometimes the new owner doesn't even have. I mean, you'll see some lease agreements where they signed it, but there's no phone number and there's no email to reach out and talk to those tenants. So by asking for this information, that provides it to you way ahead of time so that you can do it. I mean, as an investor, you still shouldn't contact those tenants, you know, until you own the property, but at least now you're not chasing it, you know, after the fact because it
Right.
wasn't included on the lease.
Right. No,
Any more
it's a good form. It's a real good, strong form.
Yeah, if you're an investor and your realtors aren't using this form to help you through the contract, I would strongly encourage you to, first off, work with us. You know, that would be an easy solution. But if not, if you're buying a wholesale property or something, reach out to us. We'd be happy to provide you with a blank copy of this so that, you know, you can use this to your advantage when you're doing investing. Bottom line is, though, we wanted to bring this as a topic. I think it's a huge advantage that we're able to bring as realtors dealing specifically with investment properties. When you're calling an agent that just doesn't have that investment experience, they miss a lot of this stuff. So, you know, selfless promotion, the foundations group, all of us in this call have a copy of this Estoppel agreement, and we're familiar with investors and working with multifamily properties as well as single family, because some people do buy those as well. We appreciate you guys all for jumping on this live call, and hopefully you learned something. If you have any questions, concerns, please reach out to us and we'll get that Estoppel agreement over to you or answer those questions as soon as possible.
All right. Have a good day.